What if the world's strongest naval power quietly revealed something without ever admitting it directly? What if one of the most strategically important waterways on Earth isn't being controlled as confidently as public statements suggest? Once you look at the numbers behind this story, it becomes very difficult to ignore what they might be telling us. Before we dive in, if you enjoy in-depth geopolitical analysis backed by facts instead of recycled headlines, make sure you subscribe. This channel is all about looking beyond the talking points and examining the evidence for ourselves. Hit the like button if you believe understanding global events requires more than just 30-second news clips. And if you know someone who thinks this situation is simple, send them this video because it's anything but. Let's begin. Between Iran and the Arabian Peninsula lies one of the most important waterways on the planet, the Strait of Hormuz. At its narrowest point, it's only about 21 miles wide, roughly the distance of a short highway drive. Yet, despite its size, this narrow passage carries an extraordinary responsibility. Nearly 1 out of every 5 barrels of oil consumed around the world passes through this corridor. Every day, massive tankers loaded with crude oil travel through these waters, supplying energy to countries across Asia, Europe, and beyond. Factories, transportation systems, power plants, and entire economies depend on these shipments arriving safely. Because of that, the Strait of Hormuz has always been considered one of the world's most sensitive strategic choke points. Whoever can influence what happens here holds significant leverage over global energy markets. Today, as tensions between the United States and Iran continue to rise, this narrow waterway has once again become the center of international attention. On one side, senior American officials have publicly projected confidence. Their message has been consistent: the situation remains under control, commercial shipping is protected, and military operations are successfully maintaining security throughout the region. Those statements are designed to reassure allies, stabilize financial markets, and demonstrate confidence during a period of uncertainty. But another picture begins to emerge when we look beyond speeches and examine independent shipping activity. Several maritime intelligence firms continuously monitor vessel movements using satellite tracking systems and automatic identification signals. Unlike political speeches, these systems simply record where ships are and where they aren't. According to reports from shipping analysts, during periods of heightened regional tension, tanker traffic moving through the strait has dropped dramatically compared to normal levels. Under ordinary circumstances, roughly 100 commercial vessels may transit the strait each day. Yet, during some of the most tense periods, publicly available tracking data suggested that only a handful of large vessels were making the journey. Whether the exact number is 3, 4, or slightly higher is less important than the overall trend. The key point is this: traffic appeared to slow significantly below normal operating levels. That creates an obvious question. If the waterway is operating normally under effective protection, why are so many commercial ships choosing not to pass through? This is where the story becomes even more interesting. There aren't simply ships entering one single lane. Instead, different navigation routes exist through the strait. One corridor lies closer to Iranian territorial waters. Another route, supported by American naval operations, was intended to provide commercial vessels with an escorted passage designed to reduce security risks. In theory, shipping companies seeking maximum protection would naturally prefer the route backed by one of the world's most capable navies. However, shipping reports painted a more complicated picture. Some analysts observed that the limited commercial traffic continuing through the strait often stayed closer to routes near Iran's coastline rather than using the American-supported corridor in the south. If accurate, that raises uncomfortable questions, not necessarily about military capability, but about commercial confidence. Shipping companies make decisions based on risk. They don't receive political points for choosing one route over another. Their priority is protecting billion-dollar cargo, expensive vessels, and the lives of their crews. If they believe one path presents lower overall risk, that's usually the path they'll choose regardless of political messaging. That distinction matters. There's a significant difference between declaring that a route is secure and seeing private companies behave as though they fully believe it. Actions often reveal more than official statements, and when commercial behavior doesn't completely Match government messaging, analysts naturally begin asking why. Of course, there are several possible explanations. The first is public communication. Governments involved in international crises rarely emphasize uncertainty. Instead, they generally project confidence because confidence itself can become a strategic tool. Strong public messaging can calm investors. It can reassure allies. It can discourage adversaries from testing military resolve. History offers many examples where governments presented the strongest possible narrative even while dealing with highly complicated realities behind closed doors. That doesn't automatically mean public statements are false. It simply means their purpose often extends beyond describing events with perfect precision. A second explanation involves the shipping industry itself. Commercial shipping companies operate under enormous financial pressure. Even if naval protection exists, insurance premiums can rise dramatically during periods of conflict. Some insurers may refuse coverage altogether. Captains may delay departures. Energy companies may temporarily reduce shipments. Owners of multi-million-dollar vessels naturally become cautious when missiles, drones, or military operations enter the picture. In other words, slower traffic may reflect economic caution just as much as military conditions. Fear alone can significantly reduce commercial activity. Then comes the third possibility: perhaps the available numbers simply don't support the level of control being described publicly. Perhaps reality on the water is more complicated than official messaging suggests. Perhaps no single side truly controls every aspect of what is happening. Whatever explanation carries the greatest weight, and it's likely some combination of all three. The measurable reality remains difficult to ignore. One of the world's most critical energy corridors has experienced unusually reduced traffic. Commercial behavior appears far more cautious than official statements might imply, and the gap between political messaging and observable shipping patterns deserves careful examination rather than quick conclusions. Because what happens inside this narrow strip of water doesn't stay there, its consequences eventually travel much farther than the ships themselves. Every delayed tanker has the potential to influence energy supplies. Every disruption can ripple through transportation costs. Every increase in uncertainty affects industries that depend on reliable fuel deliveries. For most people, the Strait of Hormuz seems like a distant place they'll never visit, yet decisions made in those waters can eventually influence fuel prices, manufacturing costs, airline tickets, shipping expenses, and even grocery bills thousands of miles away. That's why understanding what's actually happening there matters. Not because headlines say it does, but because the numbers quietly suggest that something important may already be unfolding. At first glance, the slowdown in shipping should have produced one obvious result: higher oil prices. That's how energy markets usually work. When a critical supply route becomes uncertain, traders typically expect fewer shipments, tighter supply, and increased costs. Those expectations often push prices upward long before an actual shortage reaches consumers. But this situation turned out to be far more complicated. Instead of a dramatic and immediate spike, oil prices remained surprisingly restrained for periods of the crisis. That confused many observers because the physical risks appeared far greater than the market reaction suggested. So what explains the difference? The answer begins with understanding that financial markets don't trade today's reality alone. They trade tomorrow's expectations. Every major investment fund, commodity trader, and energy company constantly asks the same question: what is most likely to happen next? If investors believe a disruption will only last a few days, they may avoid making aggressive bets. If they expect governments to stabilize the region quickly, markets often remain calmer than headlines would suggest. In other words, prices don't always reflect what's happening right now. They often reflect what traders believe will happen in the near future. Another important factor is global oil inventories. Many countries maintain strategic petroleum reserves specifically for emergencies. Large energy companies also hold commercial stockpiles that can temporarily cushion unexpected disruptions. These reserves don't eliminate risk, but they buy time. Instead of panicking immediately, markets first evaluate whether existing inventories can bridge the gap until normal shipping resumes. Demand expectations also play a major role. If analysts believe the global economy is slowing, They may expect lower fuel consumption in the months ahead. Lower expected demand can offset fears of reduced supply. That's why energy prices sometimes remain surprisingly stable even during periods of geopolitical tension. But none of this removes the underlying uncertainty. It simply delays the moment when uncertainty fully reaches the market. Another layer often overlooked involves the insurance industry. Every commercial tanker entering a conflict zone requires insurance coverage worth hundreds of millions of dollars. As regional risks increase, insurance premiums can rise dramatically. In some situations, insurers may even refuse coverage altogether. For shipping companies, that creates a difficult calculation. Even if military escorts are available, operating costs may become so expensive that delaying shipments appears to be the safer financial decision. This means fewer ships can move not because they physically cannot, but because the economic risks become unacceptable. That distinction is critical. Sometimes commerce slows not because routes are completely blocked, but because uncertainty itself becomes too expensive. The psychological impact of conflict is often just as powerful as the conflict itself. Businesses value predictability. When predictability disappears, caution quickly replaces confidence. Attention has also shifted toward long-term solutions. Some policymakers have argued that reducing dependence on the Strait of Hormuz should become a strategic priority. The idea sounds simple: build additional pipelines, expand export terminals outside the Gulf, create alternative routes that bypass the narrow waterway altogether. In theory, that would reduce one of the world's biggest energy vulnerabilities. Reality, however, is much more complicated. Large-scale energy infrastructure cannot be built overnight. A major international pipeline requires years of planning, environmental studies, financing, engineering, political agreements, and security guarantees before construction even begins. After that comes several more years of actual construction. By the time such a project becomes operational, the geopolitical landscape may have changed entirely. There's another challenge. Pipelines may avoid one shipping route, but they don't eliminate strategic risk. Any large piece of energy infrastructure has a fixed location. It can be monitored. It can be disrupted. It can become part of future military calculations if regional tensions escalate again. In other words, changing the transportation method doesn't automatically remove the vulnerability. It simply shifts where that vulnerability exists. Political cooperation presents another obstacle. Many proposed routes require multiple governments to work together for decades. That level of coordination depends on stable diplomatic relationships, economic incentives, and regional trust conditions that cannot always be guaranteed. Investors understand this very well. Before committing billions of dollars, they need confidence that a project will remain commercially viable for many years. Without long-term stability, financing becomes far more difficult. For that reason, many infrastructure announcements should be viewed as strategic planning rather than immediate solutions. They represent future possibilities, not answers to today's challenges. Meanwhile, commercial shipping still depends largely on the same narrow waterway that has carried global energy supplies for decades. That is why every development in the region continues to attract worldwide attention, because until meaningful alternatives exist, the Strait of Hormuz remains one of the most influential pieces of geography in the global economy. And as long as that remains true, every military decision, every diplomatic meeting, and every movement of commercial shipping through those waters will continue shaping the expectations of governments, investors, and consumers across the world. The story, therefore, is no longer only about ships. It has become a test of confidence in markets, confidence in diplomacy, and confidence that one of the world's most important energy corridors can continue operating despite growing geopolitical pressure. As the economic story continued unfolding, another battle was taking place at the same time, one fought through military positioning, diplomatic messaging, and public perception. War is no longer measured only by missiles and aircraft. In today's world, information itself has become a strategic weapon. Every official statement is carefully crafted. Every military exercise sends a message. Every satellite image is analyzed. And every public announcement is designed to influence not only the opposing government but also financial markets. allied nations, and domestic audiences. That is exactly what makes this situation so difficult to interpret. Both sides have strong reasons to project confidence. For the United States, demonstrating that international shipping remains protected reinforces its long-standing role as a guarantor of global maritime security. For Iran, showing that it can influence one of the world's most important energy corridors strengthens its regional leverage and reminds the international community of its strategic importance. Neither side benefits politically from appearing weak. As a result, public messaging often becomes more certain than the underlying reality. Behind those statements, however, military planners face a much more complicated challenge. Securing a narrow waterway is not simply about deploying warships. Commercial vessels move at different speeds. Traffic must remain organized. Potential threats can emerge from drones, fast attack boats, mines, missiles, or cyber operations targeting navigation systems. Protecting dozens of commercial ships simultaneously requires constant coordination across air, sea, intelligence, and surveillance networks. Even with overwhelming naval capabilities, maintaining that level of security day after day places enormous demands on military resources. At the same time, every additional military deployment carries its own risks. More forces in a confined area increase the possibility of accidents, miscommunication, or unintended escalation. History shows that major conflicts have sometimes begun not through deliberate decisions but through misunderstandings, miscalculations, or isolated incidents that quickly spiraled beyond anyone's original intentions. That possibility remains one of the greatest concerns for diplomats, because once direct confrontation begins, controlling its pace becomes far more difficult. This explains why military strength and diplomatic negotiations often advance together rather than separately. Publicly, governments may emphasize resolve. Privately, communication channels frequently remain open. Negotiators continue talking. Regional partners hold meetings. Intelligence agencies exchange information. Back-channel diplomacy quietly attempts to prevent events from moving beyond the point of control. Those conversations rarely receive the same media attention as dramatic headlines, yet they often play the most important role in preventing wider conflict. Another important factor involves international alliances. No major power makes decisions in complete isolation. Every action influences partners, trading relationships, defense agreements, and regional stability. Countries dependent on Gulf energy supplies carefully monitor developments because disruptions affect their own economies. Importing nations worry about energy security. Exporting nations worry about market stability. Shipping companies worry about operational risk. Insurance providers worry about financial exposure. Financial institutions worry about investment uncertainty. Each group views the crisis through a different lens, yet all of them remain connected. That interconnected pressure makes simple solutions extremely difficult. Military escalation may solve one problem while creating several new ones. Diplomatic compromise may reduce tensions but require politically difficult concessions. Economic sanctions may increase pressure but also reshape global trade in unexpected ways. Every option carries costs, and every decision creates consequences extending far beyond the immediate region. This is why experienced analysts rarely describe situations like this in absolute terms. Instead of asking who is completely winning or completely losing, they ask a different question: which side is gaining leverage over time? Leverage can appear in many forms. It may come through military positioning. It may come through economic resilience. It may come through stronger alliances, or it may come through maintaining domestic political support during prolonged periods of uncertainty. Those factors cannot always be measured with a single headline. They develop gradually, sometimes over months rather than days. Meanwhile, commercial shipping, financial markets, and diplomatic negotiations continue responding to every new development. Each missile test, each official speech, each naval exercise, and each policy announcement becomes another piece of a much larger strategic puzzle. The challenge for observers is separating measurable facts from political narratives. Ship movements can be tracked, energy exports can be estimated, market prices can be monitored, but intentions, remain far more difficult to understand. That is why certainty should always be approached carefully. The reality is that no outside observer has access to every conversation taking place behind closed doors. What we can do is examine the available evidence, compare public statements with observable developments, and recognize where unanswered questions still remain. And at this stage, those unanswered questions continue to be just as important as the answers themselves. So where does all of this leave the world? The most accurate answer is surprisingly simple. No one knows with complete certainty, and that uncertainty may be the biggest story of all. Too often, global crises are presented as if they have clear winners, clear losers, and obvious outcomes. Reality rarely works that way. Instead, what we're witnessing is a stress test affecting several interconnected systems at the same time: military strategy, global energy markets, international diplomacy, commercial shipping, financial confidence, and long-term infrastructure planning. Each of these influences the others. If shipping remains restricted, energy companies begin adjusting export schedules. If energy exports slow, governments start evaluating emergency reserves. If markets become nervous, investors reduce risk. If economic pressure grows, political leaders face increasing pressure to negotiate. Every decision creates another chain reaction. That's why this story cannot be understood by looking at only one headline or one public statement. The real picture only appears when all of these moving pieces are viewed together. History offers an important lesson here. Many of the world's biggest geopolitical turning points did not appear extraordinary while they were happening. At the time, they often looked like another tense week of headlines, another round of official statements, another cycle of conflicting reports. Only years later did people realize they had been watching the beginning of something much larger. Whether this moment becomes one of those turning points remains impossible to know today, but the conditions certainly deserve attention. One of the world's most important energy corridors continues operating under heightened pressure. Commercial shipping remains cautious, governments continue projecting confidence, markets continue balancing risk against expectation, and millions of people around the world continue depending on an energy system connected to a waterway most have never even seen. Perhaps the most important lesson isn't about choosing one political narrative over another. It's about recognizing the difference between statements and measurable facts. Public messaging serves many purposes. It reassures populations. It influences negotiations. It shapes international perception, but measurable indicators, shipping activity, energy flows, insurance costs, freight rates, and market behavior often reveal another layer of the story. Neither should be ignored. Both deserve careful examination. The challenge is understanding how they fit together. Looking ahead, several paths remain possible. Diplomatic negotiations could gradually reduce tensions and restore commercial confidence. Military deterrence could continue preventing a wider confrontation while keeping shipping lanes open. Regional powers could expand alternative export routes over time, reducing dependence on a single strategic choke point. Or new incidents could quickly change the situation in ways that markets are not yet fully pricing in. Each possibility carries different consequences for global trade, inflation, energy security, and international stability. That is why governments, investors, and security analysts continue watching the Strait of Hormuz so closely, not because every development immediately changes the world, but because every development has the potential to. For ordinary people, these events may feel distant. Yet the effects eventually travel far beyond the Gulf. Fuel prices, transportation costs, manufacturing expenses, food distribution, even the price of everyday products can be influenced by disruptions occurring thousands of miles away. Globalization has connected these systems so tightly that events in one narrow waterway can eventually affect households across continents. That reality makes understanding these developments more important than ever. As this story continues evolving, the key will not be reacting to every dramatic headline. The key will be watching the evidence, watching shipping patterns, watching diplomatic developments, watching energy markets, and watching whether observable facts continue supporting or begin challenging the public narratives presented by every side involved. Because in moments like these, the quiet data often tells the story long before history books do. Thank you for staying through this entire analysis. If you enjoy detailed geopolitical breakdowns that focus on facts, context, and careful analysis instead of sensationalism, consider subscribing. The situation in the Strait of Hormuz is still evolving, and whatever happens next won't only shape one region. It may influence the global economy for months or even years to come. Until next time, stay informed, stay curious, and always look beyond the headline.